I'm Araya April, the program assistant for the NC State Extension Master Gardener program. You'll also be hearing from Charlotte Glenn, our statewide program manager. Today, our speaker is Will Woodham. Will's going to talk to us about using AI in extension. And what we mean by AI is artificial intelligence. While preparing for this continuing ed webinar, I did ask Gemini, which is the AI tool that I sometimes use, why should we care about AI as EMG volunteers? And Gemini did give me 3 reasons to care. The first is the public is already using AI for gardening solutions and plant identification. And the second is AI tools frequently provide confident yet incorrect or even harmful gardening advice. And that's not what we want. And the third reason is AI does not replace us as EMG volunteers or extension professionals. So we are, quote, the crucial human in the loop. That's what Gemini has to say about its own relevance. I want to give you a little about our speaker today. Will Woodham has been working within NC State's EIT group for nearly 3 years as a digital content specialist. EIT, or Extension Information Technology, has a long history of being innovative, having created the first extension-based website in the 1990s. So Will and EIT have been very thoughtful about their approach to the use of AI. Will hosts training sessions and AI jam sessions across NC State Extension to promote the responsible use of AI in our work. And Will happens to be the son of an EMG volunteer down in South Carolina, which is pretty cool. Welcome, Will. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you. So you're welcome to share your screen now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me today. Let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Yeah, my mom is an Extension Master Gardener volunteer. Though admittedly, or I think she will tell you she's probably the worst. But thank you all for having me today. As we get started here, yeah, I'm gonna go through this as and make it as interesting as I possibly can. Um, some of this is a little dry, and I'll try to spice it up a little bit and make it not quite so boring. But Araya was right. It's a very important aspect of technology today. It's really kind of within the past 2 years ingrained itself within our society. You can't Google something without having, AI right there. It's very, very important to be mindful of the way you use it, um, and the way you present information from it. So all that is to say, please, feel free to ask me as many questions as you want to. I'll try to leave a good bit of room at the end so we can kind of discuss things. But in general, I hope you enjoy, and I hope I don't put you to sleep. So, so we're going to be talking about how AI works today. We'll talk about some tools that you can use. We'll talk about our guiding principles. These are based on our guiding principles here at NC State. Not all of those do apply to you, so I've removed some of those. But some of those are really good to just keep in mind. We're going to go over prompting. We'll go over some use cases, and then towards the end, we'll go over some pitfalls, things you need to look out for. Let's see if this will actually load. It doesn't look like it's going to this morning. That's fine. It's a video that discusses, there we go, kind of how large language models work, right? So ChatGPT and Gemini are two of the bigger large language models that you've probably heard of. And essentially what they are is they are a type of AI known as a generative pre-trained transformer. And that is a fancy way of saying it's a bunch of small nodes that randomly modify data that's put into it to give you the statistical most likely next word to come out of it, right? So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, I think this is really key in keeping in mind how these technologies work and how you should interact with them. They don't think. There is no real intelligence there. they are giving you what is statistically most likely to come next, right? They're really good at that. And the way that information is transformed behind the scenes does a really good job at mimicking intelligence. And it feels like you're having a conversation with another person, but in all actuality, it's just giving you statistical likeliness. There's a little bit of randomness there as well, just so things don't come out the exact same way every time you type them in. But that's something that you need to keep in mind, right? It's not thinking, it doesn't know anything. It's essentially a black box that we put information into and get what is most likely to come after that text out of it, right? So your big tools that I would definitely recommend using, especially as you start kind of delving into these tools, are ChatGPT and Gemini. Right? Both of those have free versions. At NC State, we prefer the use of Gemini. Um, our ncsu.edu domain address holders, so people have those in their email, can use the paid version of Gemini for free, which is really nice. One thing to keep in mind is that by default, ChatGPT will train on the data that you are giving it. You can disable that in the settings. So, as you're using this, just keep in mind information that you give it. Just because you're using the system for free doesn't mean you aren't paying for it. You're paying for it by providing them training data. So I would definitely recommend disabling that. Um, Another one I would recommend using is Grammarly. Grammarly has a really great free plan. It allows you to do things like check your grammar, check your spelling. It also has tools to help you rewrite for tone, accuracy, and things like that. And then Zoom AI. There are some tools, especially with personal Zoom plans, that you can use, like the Zoom AI companion, that will allow you to ask questions of things that are happening on the screen. Right now, my Zoom is recording this, and I'll get a summary of what's been said today, of the questions that have been asked, things like that, directly to my email after this. And you can do that by going to zoom.com, going into the settings, and there's a giant list of AI generated tools. Actually, I can show you that really quickly. It's going to look a little different for some of you, because I'm using an enterprise version. Let me sign in here really quickly. I'll just give you a general idea of where those are found. So I've signed into my Zoom. Over here on the left-hand side, you can go to settings. And then here under your AI companion, you can enable those AI companion features. Some of mine are actually disabled by requirements. We have to follow the rules of OIT. Um, so one second, I'm going to answer that email in just a second. That question is just a second. Anyways, so yeah, basically you can enable these. It'll give you some additional smart features into your Zoom. Um, Mostly in regards to being able to ask questions about summaries that you've generated by being in meetings. I use them from time to time when I'm having even a meeting in person with somebody else. I'll hop on Zoom, record the meeting, and then I'll have notes of it automatically generated. Let me get my chat up here too, just in case someone asks me questions. Yeah, there are ways to forget, quote unquote, forget things that it knows. Um, One thing to keep in mind is you can prevent the companies that run these large language models from training on your data by asking them to not train on your data. That being said, your data is still going to be stored and used in a lot of these cases, mostly to provide what's known as context. So these large language models keep roughly the last 35,000-ish words that you've talked to them about, that they've given you and that you've given them, to help inform the information that they gather going forward. Um, if you've ever seen, there've been a few trends where you might ask ChatGPT to draw a picture of you based on previous chats, right? The way it's able to do that is through that context. So there's some guiding principles as we get moving into the large language model portion as we start talking about prompts. These are things I recommend all the time to keep in mind as you're using these AI. Um, if you use AI in a very material way, right? If you use it to generate an image, if you use it to generate an article for a newsletter and that asset is significantly derived by AI, you do need to disclose it. I would highly recommend that you don't do that, right? These tools are great for planning out content, for helping you edit and revise content, but the bulk of that content should still come from you. Um, so use it as a tool, don't use it as a replacement for yourself. It's going to be wrong. Everything you create needs to be looked at, right? Ensure that the content is accurate. Like Ryan mentioned earlier, these tools tend to do things like hallucinate. Um, so a hallucination is just kind of a fancy term for getting information wrong, creating information where it doesn't necessarily or where it does not exist, right? Like we spoke about earlier, these tools are statistical models. They're not thinking, and they're programmed to want to give you an answer, right? Um, they are designed that no matter what question you give it, it gives you some answer back. What that ends up meaning is that if there's not enough information about the thing you're asking it, it's just going to make things up. So every single thing that it generates for you needs to be reviewed by you. You know, you're the expert here over this AI. It's a good tool to use, but make sure that you keep your eyes on it. One example of that we like to use, we were training some horticulture specialists at NC State, and we were asking it some questions about killing sedge in a lawn. And one of the AI's top recommendations was to use an herbicide against the sedge, like Roundup, right? And I'm sure that's going to get rid of the sedge, but it's also going to kill all of my grass around it. Um, so it can get a general answer correct, but there's no real specific knowledge there. It's not thinking, just once again. And then the last thing to keep in mind is AI is potentially biased, right? I would revise that. Those are the words that NC State uses in regards to the bias. AI is biased. There's no potentially, it is biased. Um, it should always be viewed as incorrect, right? There's the old saying, trust but verify. When it comes to I like to use the phrase don't trust and definitely verify. One of the easiest ways to demonstrate this kind of bias there, and often the bias isn't going to be something as visible as this, right? Um, but the way bias in these data sets work, or in these large language models work, is that depending on the information that was used to train the model, you will get that specific information out, right? So if you focus on, say, giving it information about gardens in Washington State and you don't include anything about gardens in North Carolina, all of the recommendations you're going to get in regards to the questions you ask are going to be based on that information from Washington State. An even more visible uh, version of that is I'm going to ask it to generate an image. It's going to be of a watch face, and the time is going to be set to, we'll say 4:30, right? Um, so what this is going to do theoretically is create an image for us. It'll be an image of a watch face. It'll have a time set on there. I can guarantee you before it generates the issue with this. That watch face is going to be set to 10:10. One of these days, I'm going to get that wrong. They're going to fix it and make me look like a fool, but not today, right? We have the words 4:30 written on here, but it's set to 10:10. The reason for this is because the data that they used to train the model on images of watches was data that was free and easy to get access to, right? That data, those images of watches, were images used to sell watches. 1010 tends to be the time that manufacturers use to set for their images because it looks really nice, right? So there is an inherent bias in that data toward setting it to 1010. You can prompt it all day long to set it to a different time. It's not going to work. There's also, some you may have seen before us, create an image of a glass of wine that's completely full, right? No one really creates glasses of wine that are completely full. For the most part, and definitely doesn't take pictures of it. And so there's not enough data for it to create that image. So it tends to create one that's half full or three-quarters full. This is, like I said, a very obtuse way to look at this bias, but that bias is there and it's in data, it's hidden, and you don't know it's there while you're using it unless you keep that bias in mind as you're going forward. I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do next is we are going to discuss what a prompt is and how to generate one, right? So when we typed in generate an image of a watch face and the time is set to 4:30, that's what is called a prompt, right? A prompt is the input that you are giving to the large language model with the expectation that it will respond to that prompt with something relevant. So it's the fancy words of it's the message that you send the chatbot, right? One way that I really like to make my prompts more efficient, I follow the CRISP method. Um, I changed this up recently. I thought CRISP sounded more fun than a bunch of random letters in an acronym. But the CRISP stands for context, request, input, style, and persona, right? These are really, really helpful, not only in terms of getting a good response from the AI or the large language model, but they're good in helping you think about what you need to know, right? None of these are required. Um, as you can tell, I didn't use it in the last prompt that we created, but they are helpful in building a good context to get a good response back, right? So outside of the way I've been using context to mean everything that you and the AI chatbot have previously discussed. Context in regards to your prompt is all of the unsaid things that you innately know, or a large subset of them that are relevant to the task at hand, right? So anytime you talk to one of these large language models, you assume they don't know anything about the situation you're in, where you are, right? Um, this could be, hey, you are in charge of, actually, I guess it would be a role. This could be something like you are located in Wake County, North Carolina, right? You have a backyard that has slightly acidic soil. You have to have hybridized Bermuda because of HOA requirements. You have a fig tree. You have a crepe myrtle in the backyard, and you have a red maple in the backyard. Um, right, these are just general facts about the situation that would come in handy for anyone who's about to work on the problem. You want to include a request. The request is something that should be in every prompt, right? This is the thing that you want. You want it to be as short as possible and as clearly defined as possible. Summarize key points for a social media post. Uh, where is the best place to plant tomatoes in my garden because I would like a tomato plant. Um, what would be a good heavy sun plant or bush to keep alongside my fence, something like that. This is the exact thing that you want, right? Then you have your input. So input and context seem like they would be a lot alike, whereas context is the general information about, where you are, what you may need to be doing. Your input is every single thing that is required. So these are the essentials, right? You have 4 feet of space to do it. I want to plant this in early fall, late summer. Make recommendations for plants that don't require a lot of water because my wife and I are going to forget to water it. Things like that. So these are the very, very nitty-gritty specifics of that. Think of these as like your who, what, when, where, how. Next is your style, right? This could also be renamed as format. Um, Let it know the style or the format of the answer that you want, right? Should this be a bulleted list? Does this need to be in the form of a paragraph? Do you need to, I need you to write, I don't know, a rap song about the best tomatoes to plant in early summer, things like that. This is your specific way that you want that structured. Do you have any character limits, things like that? And then persona is one of the other portions of this that I think are really key. It's not required, but it's a really quick way to get a lot of really good context in there, right? So context is that information again that is just generalized. Persona is kind of that same way, right? But you're giving the AI a role. You're a horticultural specialist, you're an extension master gardener volunteer, you are a homeowner, things like that. You let it know kind of how to approach the problem and from what perspective to approach the problem. Um, Part of that persona too is you can give it an audience, right? So you can say you're an extension master gardener volunteer and you're writing a newsletter. That's our context for prospective extension master gardener volunteers, right? People who want to join the program. That way it knows kind of how it needs to write or what the perspective needs to write from, how it needs to write, and to what level of education it needs to write to, right? Because that's going to be different for someone who wants to be an extension master gardener volunteer versus a member of the public who knows nothing about plants. Myself is included in that. Do I need to write it towards children? Things like that. So keep in mind, as you're writing your persona, you also keep in mind your audience too. Yeah, this is a lot of stuff to keep in mind when you're writing a prompt, right? And one of the nice things about these chatbots is you can have a conversation with them. You can start with something small and you can increase the amount of data there um, to further refine your prompt as you go along. But one of the nice things about taking this all into context, answering each of these questions as you're writing your prompt, are that you are really processing what you need to know, what you want out of this, and what is an acceptable answer, right? Otherwise, you can get some vague answers that aren't necessarily specific to what you want, and it takes more time to process through those, or maybe it sends you off on the wrong thing, like we mentioned earlier, or like I mentioned earlier. You know, if you're asking it gardening questions and you don't let it know you're in North Carolina, you might be getting climate information for New Mexico or something like that. Things that aren't going to work for your specific situation. And you might know that's there, and you're getting that incorrect answers there. But you may not. It's taking the time to generate that prompt to really work on what you want and what you need and what it needs to know is going to help you in the long run anytime you're interacting with these large language models. Right? Also format your prompts. This really helps. Um, Two things I really like to do when I'm writing a prompt, especially a longer prompt, is separate things out by line. Um, yeah, crisp is essentially the who, what, when, where, whys of writing a lead. You're correct. Yeah, and I'll give you an example of I'll show you how we generate a prompt. Sorry, 1 second. I was just going back through these questions. I apologize. I'm not used to reading these as I'm going through. So let's talk about it, right? Does anyone have a question that you would like to ask? Does anyone have any ideas? We could say, I've got an ornamental cherry tree. How about that, right? So we say you are an extension master gardener. I apologize for any misspellings. Volunteer working in Wake County, North Carolina, right? So we've given it a role and we've given it that persona, and we've given it a little bit of context here. So the next thing we need to do is so we go back here. Give it the context. We need to give it a request. Let's work on the persona and the context first, right? So you're an extension master gardener volunteer working in Wake County, North Carolina. It is late summer, going on fall, and someone has come to you asking about why there are holes in their ornamental cherry tree leaves, right? Um, they have noticed small cocoons made of evergreen um, up leaves. I know that's not the correct term. We'll say evergreen needles. Right. So we have a little bit of context here. So we've given it our role. We've given it our context. Um, we've given it that persona. So the role or persona. We've given it our context. Um, we're going to tell it that, we want 2 to 3 things that it could potentially be, right? So give us 2 to 3 potential causes and solutions for this issue. Give it to us in a list of short 2 to 3 sentence paragraphs. And one thing I like to do too is, if you can, cite each of these causes and solutions. Try to use content.cs.ncsu.edu and its sites for most of the information, right? So one thing that you can do, and this is something I always recommend when using these large language models, ask it to cite. A lot of times Gemini will do this by default, but it won't do it every time. If you ask it to cite, it will provide citations for the information it's providing. This helps you to verify immediately where that information is coming. And Vilmore, I'll answer your question in just a second, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll put this in here. We've given it a context, role. We've given it information, right? So bagworms, right? The eastern tent caterpillar and fall webworm are the big ones. Especially since I mentioned cocoons in there, it's going to, that context is definitely going to go more towards a pest version. You can ask it to cite only academic sources. It's not necessarily going to pull information from academic sources, but it will try to keep your citations there, right? This is one of our issues here, and I'm going to answer, Ed, I'll get to your question in just a second. The question, do you think Gemini is a good tool for creating an archive of miscellaneous information currently available to EMG and county extensions to a wider public, right? That is tied into the question of, can you ask it to cite only academic sources? And the answer is no. Um, you know, all of these you can ask it to try to only use .edu sites, right? And it will provide you links to .edu sites, some of which could potentially not be real. Um, but one of the issues with that is that it's still going to use data that it was trained on, which includes information from the wider web, which may not be accurate. And even if that is accurate, since it's not really thinking about the data, it doesn't know anything about the data, there can still be hallucinations in there that are incorrect. So even if we could guarantee it only used information from NC State extension from our content database, we cannot guarantee that every single time that information is going to be correct. Which means that our professionals, you as Extension Master Gardener volunteers, have to have eyes on it, right? It's one of the reasons we have a great group of developers here, and we even worked with a group out of MIT or from MIT to try to generate a chat bot really, really early on to take advantage of this, right? One thing that was mentioned in my kind of bio that I really wanted to put out there is that we here at NC State Extension, especially EIT, um, try to be at the forefront of every technology that we can, right? Anything we can do to make this information more accessible to people, we are going to do everything we can to do it. And we have not found a way to remove the chance for data to be inaccurate to a point where it is worth it to share with the final audience or with the greater wider public, as coming from NC State without having somebody look at it first. There's just no way to do that. I hope that answers your question there. So Gemini is trained on a bunch of data. There's no way for us to know exactly what it was trained on. Um, there are promises that it wasn't trained on copyrighted data, for instance, but several lawsuits against Google's competitors have proven that that's not always necessarily the case, even if they say it is. The reason why it's NC Extension's preferred choice is because we only are allowed to use software that has been approved by our general counsel and by the Office of IT of Information Technology. And Gemini is the only free to use for North Carolina State professionals chat bot that is available. I hope that's a that's a long way of winded way of saying that's what we've been told to use. So that's why we use it. But Gemini is great, honestly. We have a few offices that pay for ChatGPT, which they're allowed to do. But Gemini does 99.9% of the same thing. How do we take advance? So that's the question, right? The question is, how do we believe the information received from our searches? Um, you can ask for links to sources to verify. Yep. So 100%, I always recommend doing that. It's really good for doing some research for you. Um, one of the features that Gemini does have is a deep research feature. Let me see. I should have it right here. Right here, right? So what I did is, if you go to Gemini, you can click on this tool button and click on deep research, um, and ask it to do deep research on a specific topic. It will go through, analyze that data. It provides specific resources to each of those things. One of the issues, though, once again, is you're going to get things like links to Reddit, to user crowdsourced generated things, which aren't always incorrect, but may not necessarily be true, right? So always, always, always verify everything. Um, So Gemini just allows you to kind of get at the heart of things, right? You can use it as a generalized search engine, but you can ask it questions. It's better at coming up with answers to abstract questions rather than something that's specific, right? If you know how to Google specifically for that answer, what I would definitely recommend doing is checking the content database. That's actually one thing that we discussed. I was working with our development team this morning, and Scott here at EIT as well, is, at what point does a chatbot just become a glorified search engine, right? And there's a lot of fuzziness there. There's a lot of gray area there. Um, but let's ask it a question, right? So we could do something like I created this EMG bot. Um, it has an EMG bot is something that's known as a custom gem in Gemini or a custom GPT in ChatGPT. And what that means is that every time it runs, it has a custom set of instructions that run every single time, right? I've given it a role here. I've given it a task. I've told it to constrain all references and results to the content database, right? This is where all of our publications are, or publications and fact sheets, and make sure all information is referenced to its original source. So, I could ask it something like, what is the brown spots? I'll try to say, I guess. Um, right. And one of the nice things is that it has taken a question that you're not necessarily going to get an exact search result for through Google or through scholar.google.com. Or even, if I went to our content database right here and searched for brown spots azalea, right? I'm going to get to pests of azalea, and then I can read through some of this stuff. After search through scale, caterpillars, things like that. Or, I could ask it for brown spots and azalea leaves. And so it's going to give me information from those specific pests and link me directly into it, right? So we'll go in here to lace bugs. It'll talk about azalea lace bugs. Let's see, right here for the azalea bark scale. So this is one of those, what point? Anyways, this is one of those examples of using it as a mixture of a chat bot and a search engine, right? I've asked it a really non-specific question. It's taken that non-specific question, it's turned it into some specific feedback that I can then use. Or, I guess move away from, maybe it's like, I don't think it's pest related. It's not getting a lot of water, right? So in a Google search, you might have to start a new search in the content database. You may have to start a new search, right? But with one of these chat bots, it'll keep in mind all the context here. So it's giving me information on watering azaleas. Yeah, I've got a thing here on azalea diseases and pests. And actually, let me see. I don't even know if that's a real fact sheet. It's not. So there we go. There's a hallucination. This is why you can't trust it 100% of the time. This is why we cannot make it public facing at this point, if that makes sense. Um, it doesn't look good. And even more anecdotally, we have had um, experts here at NC State who have it's happened in one case where an expert was accused of using artificial intelligence to generate an article um, on a specific topic. I'm trying to be as generalized as I can be. And we heard almost immediately from three different county extension directors, about people who really thought that this was AI. Um, and how upset they were. They couldn't trust the credibility of NC State Extension based on that, right? So there's a level of accuracy and of authenticity that needs to kind of come anytime you're working with members of the public. I know you don't represent NC State, but if we were to create a generalized chat bot based on Extension Master Gardener volunteer knowledge, we couldn't then also guarantee that it would be correct. Gemini, yeah, Gemini should, their free version should never charge you. Um, so like if you can hit rate limits for it in a 24-hour period, but they'll never just start to charge you. You would have to pay for it and agree to anything ahead of time. Does it all make sense so far? Perfect. I'm going to go into some of our more advanced prompting techniques. We'll skip that page. It's not as much fun. Two fun things, right? I went over those basics of generating a prompt. These are my two favorite ways to quote unquote hack a really good answer out of these chatbots. And some of this they're already doing in the background, right? When you ask Gemini a question, um, and ChatGPT a question, a lot of times what they're doing is they are editing your prompt to then create another prompt to then create another prompt to then answer your question. Um, and one of the ways they do that is by having the model think through something step by step, right? So if we came back here and we said, diagnose my brown spots on tomato leaves. I apologize. I keep using brown spots in tomatoes. I just know that we will get something somewhat accessible back from these, right? Um, so we have a decent amount of information here. It might be early blight or septoria leaf spot. We have some care and treatment plans, right? We could also come here. We'll start a new chat and say, I have brown spots on my tomato plants. Think through what this could be, how to diagnose each of those possibilities, and give me solutions based on each, right? So we're asking it before it gives us an answer to think through the problem, to come up with things that it could be, how we can diagnose each of those and give me solutions based on those, right? So it's not just answering the original question. It's going through and thinking about the answer and then answering it after that. So you are prompting it to generate more context for it to work from. And from that, you get more information. One other thing that's kind of close to that is meta prompting, right? So you could always do something even like, and then I'm just going through these quickly. I apologize. Write me a good prompt for finding out why my tomato plant has brown spots, right? You can just ask it to write a good prompt for you. Um, so here is an example prompt, right? It's created a good, well-rounded prompt for us, according to it. And then we can come back in here, start a new chat context, put that in. One thing to keep in mind as you're working through this too are there's two types of context. There's your general account context, right? Which keeps in mind everything that you've ever chatted with it. And well, up to 35,000 words and everything that it's given back to you. And then there is chat-based context, which is everything that is specific to that chat. One of the reasons I keep using these new chats are so that it doesn't take information that it previously generated in that chat into account. So, to prevent some kind of cross-pollination between prompts, I just started a new one. So yeah, so we have some decent things here. So we have common causes, actionable solutions, things like that we got from basically just asking it to help write a prompt for us. So we didn't have to think about it. Um, those are good ways to kind of get some really good options from that. The big things too when it comes to our pitfalls. Do we have any questions, I guess, before I get into pitfalls about prompting? Does that all make sense to everybody? You don't have to answer. It's just, if no one has a question right ahead, we'll go on ahead. So these are your pitfalls. These are things that you really, really, really need to look out for. Um, I would always, and I've said this probably 100 times already today, and I'll say it a million times more. Fact check all AI generated content. Use AI as a tool, not as a replacement. Be mindful of the data that you put in there, right? Here at NC State, we talk about research data and things like that, but even personal private data, somebody's, house number, don't use it to be like, hey, somebody lives at 123 Main Street in Wendell, North Carolina. Give me some information about their general climate, right? Don't include things like that. And always encourage the critical evaluation of AI recommendations, right? So as we saw, hallucinations lead to incorrect or misleading information. Um, you know, AI could do something like say coffee grounds improve soil acidity, so you should keep those coffee grounds. The effect is minimal, varies by decomposition stage. It doesn't really necessarily work. Um, but it's something that's highly touted, right? Anything that might be an old wives' tale that's not, fact based can come into here because it's being trained off of data that is freely available on the open web. So just keep that in mind. And it can just generate fake things like we saw with the URL earlier. Data privacy concerns, not as much for y'all, but I do want to keep that in here. Just make sure you're not putting people's full names in there. For whatever reason you may do that. Don't put people's addresses in there either. Um, please recognize bias in AI outputs. This is a really good example too, right? AI may suggest synthetic fertilizers over organic alternatives, just because more data is available publicly than data on conventional methods. You tend to probably you will know things, or you're more of an expert, like I said earlier, than these artificial intelligences are, than these generalized pre-trained transformers are. Um, but keep in mind that there's going to be bias in everything that it creates. And then just keep in mind too that you need to think critically about everything it gives you. It may recommend something that's a national best practice, but doesn't align with North Carolina specific things. Um, AI identify copyrighted material that might need. It will not. It can potentially be trained on copyrighted information, and theoretically, you are responsible for not regurgitating that copyrighted information. Um, One of the reasons why I recommend using it to give you citations and then following those citations yourself is because you do avoid some of those issues, right? Um, and yeah, basically just you need to verify that what you've created from that is not, as long as you're using this to help generate ideas for yourself, as long as you're using this to scaffold out ideas or to do research, and you're then using that information yourself, you're not going to have copyrighted material, right? Because you have taken that and you would have used that by yourself. Um, Melissa, that's a really good question. The question is, with all the problems of AI, why should we use it? Um, and the answer is because it's really good at taking abstract data, abstract questions, and turning them into actionable items, right? It's really, really good at offloading things that might take a lot of brain power to get started and aren't necessarily things that you need to do, right? Things like scaffolding out an idea for a newsletter is really, really good at doing that. It's good at doing the first bit of research on something that you may need to dive deeper in. It's good at getting you started. I'm somebody I have to do a lot of writing in terms of generating some materials internally, in terms of writing articles for our website and things like that, where I can say, hey, Gemini, you're an extension information technology professional specializing in digital content. You need to create something interesting about alt text this week. Give me three fun facts about alt text for me to look into, right? And that gets me started. That's the first hurdle. There's something on the page that I can then throw away, replace with what I want to say, or go in a specific direction. Um,
I'm,
it's not. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, I'll also add, Will, I use it a lot actually on the end of that process. I'll come up with an idea and write something up. Then I will often ask AI to improve it for, better clarity, flow, easy to read, or streamline or make it shorter. So, there's both ends of the creative process, the coming up with the ideas and then the refining what you've already put the work into to make sure it has the right information.
Exactly. It's perfect at the beginning as a tool and at the end as a tool, right? It can help you plan out what you want to do. It can help you plan out what you want to write. And then at the end, like Charlotte said, it can help you to refine what you've written. I'm really bad about, writing up and down. Um, a lot of ways. I try to be as personable as I can to a lot of people. But sometimes, I'll have issues rewording things that I've written to make sense at a lower level. I have trouble dumbing things down, I guess, or I guess not dumbing things down. That's not a good way to put it. I have troubles with simplifying concepts in my head, and as you've listened to me go on and on today, I tend to ramble when I do that, and so having it help me shorten up sentences has been really nice. Mark Twain once said, "If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter." Um, and I've always tried to take that into heart when I write, and Chat GPT and Gemini, these large language models, have helped me do that. Um, that's a really good question too, Sean. That's something that I mentioned earlier with authenticity. Uh, Authenticity has been the goal word or the big phrase that every single person has used here at Extension IT. Um, this whole past year, right? I do a lot of editing of articles that get posted to our site. I read through them all. I try to make sure they're formatted correctly and things like that. And one of my issues has always been, how do I fix somebody's grammar without removing their voice, without making it sound authentic to them? Because, when you write something, especially in a semi-professional context, you still want a bit of yourself in there uh, to remain authentic with your audience. And it can take the personality out of the article, right? That's one of the reasons why I think Grammarly is a really good tool because instead of feeding an entire, four paragraphs in there and asking it to rewrite it based on tone, um, or reading level, you can take it and rewrite specific sentences that just aren't quite meshing with the way you want them to sound. It gives you a lot more control over it. Or you can do that too, right? You can give it the whole context and say, hey, um, I've done this before. I've said, hey, here is my, article. It's, let's say, 10 paragraphs, right? Um, take this into context. Don't say yes that you've gotten it and then don't say anything else about it, right? I'll put that in there. It'll say yes. And then I'll say, hey, I really am having issues with this excerpt from it. And then I'll copy the sentence, paste it in there. How can I reword this sentence to make it make more sense? Um, and, I'll just get that one sentence out, see if I like it, read through it, maybe have it regenerate that, and then move that over. So there's a few ways that you can do it. The big thing is making sure that you use it as a tool and not a replacement for the work that you're doing or for your own thoughts. That is actually also my last slide. I'm going to come back up here, and we only have a couple more minutes left, but I want to answer any other questions that we may have.
Well, we did have a question. Say you're just getting started and you've never used any of these tools. Would you just come to the website and start
Yeah,
typing?
so the easiest way to do it is to just, if you, like I said, we use Gemini. So you can go to gemini.google.com, or you can just go to google.com and let's see. That's the Google. That's the thing here. One second. You can just type in Gemini right here, and it'll take you straight into Gemini, and then you can just ask it a question. It's as easy as that. I believe you don't even have to sign in for the base model of Gemini. Um, I would recommend you signing in. That way you keep some of your chat history. Mine goes back a long way. But one of the nice things about this is that even though I recommend using the CRISP methodology for generating those prompts, you can just start with a hey, right? It doesn't have to be something specific. It doesn't have to be something big, just get used to it. Keep in mind that it's biased and all those warnings that I always go through, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm anti-AI. I love AI, I use it all the time. Sure. I'll send that out, or I'll flip that over for you. Anyways, but yeah, it's just use it, right? Get used to interacting with it like it's a person. I like to think of it as in programming, there's something that's called the concept of a pair programmer, right? It's two people who are sitting side by side working on the same thing together. Um, think about it just like that, right? It's someone in the chair beside you, and you're working on this together, and it's a conversation you're having back and forth. And then just move on from there.
So what happens if you do see something particularly about our own content? For example, I saw Gemini summarize that the plant toolbox only has listings only for native plants to North Carolina, that the plant toolbox does not in fact have listings for other kinds of plants. And we all know that that is wrong, right? So how might we be able to correct Gemini, make a report or something like that?
So there's kind of two things, right? You can always report an issue. There's two ways, right? You can report a bad response by clicking down right here.
Mhm.
You can report a legal issue, not necessarily going to fix that. One of the issues, and I'm going to hop off of this slide really quickly just for a second. This that looks like a piece of modern art is actually kind of a little bit programmatically what it looks like. And this model is what's known as a black box model, meaning we put something into a black box and we get something out of the black box, and we don't know what happens in the middle, and we can't change what happens in the middle. Um, so the answer is that you can't, right? It can't be fixed. It's one of the other reasons why we have issues with releasing a chat bot to the public based on our material, is that if there is something wrong, we can't fix it. We could always retrain a new model, and hopefully in the next model it doesn't get it wrong. But that's a limitation of the technology. There's just nothing you can do about it, sadly. Which is also one of the reasons why you need to be responsible for making sure of the veracity of the information you're using.
Absolutely. It is our responsibility as Extension Master Gardener volunteers to provide the public with that unbiased research-based gardening information. That is what we do. And so the onus is on us to not hallucinate and to be accountable for how we use these tools that can certainly help us, and help us discover more information that we're not necessarily even aware that we have at Extension or that other EMG programs are up to. So this is certainly very insightful. Any last thoughts from you, Will?
I don't. I hope I didn't scare anybody away. I feel like every time I offer all these warnings, I'm scaring people away from the technology. It's really useful, and there's a lot of good stuff you can do with it. I just want to make sure that we use it responsibly and that we think about the way we use it. So thank you all for listening to me today. I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, we really appreciate it. I think more than anything, this reaffirmed how important it is that we still have our Master Gardener volunteers, our extension professionals, that humans are part of this process. These are just tools, but we are still in charge of them and how we use them. And let's all use them wisely. And you've given us lots of great information about how to do that.